Hey there, Super Soberheroes. It's your host, Sober Steve, the podcast guy, here for another great episode of Gay A, the Super Soberhero Show. I am happy to report that today, thanks to one day at a time, I have 1,026 days of sobriety still. Thank you for bearing with me as I have the same look for those of you watching, as well as the same day count for those of you keeping track for the past few episodes as I record a little bit ahead of schedule to accommodate my traveling plans. And I have so much I'm grateful for, though, right now that I can keep going with my gratitude. And I am grateful for being able to be living life on life's terms right now. I am also very grateful to be able to share another amazing interview with you. Today, you're going to get to hear from Brian, who has one of the more unique stories. I know we all have unique and special stories, but what I love about it is, as different as many of his circumstances might have been on paper, the feelings that he was going through, I think that it's something that all of us will be able to really deeply and truly relate with, which is one of the reasons why I love getting to interview amazing and wonderful people like Brian for this podcast. So before we get into that, I will share a little bit more on what I mean about living life on life's terms, because many of you over the past couple months have been with me on my inner conflict over my self-care routine, starting with an episode on self-care for 175 and continuing on and off. And I think that I finally gotten to a point where I feel comfortable with my self-care routine. There was a couple different circumstances that led me to realize that. Most recently was having it be the topic of living life on life's terms, and in a meeting that I went to, and just really that right now I am able to do that. And I know that a lot of that has been because I have a self-care routine that is very generous. And as Kristen taught me when they were on, that the more that we put into ourselves, the easier it is to care for others. So I'm showing up for everyone in my life in a more authentic way, in a more regular way, now that I am spending a couple hours a day on self-care. And I know that I have some friends out there, both in and out of the program, who hear that I spend probably 2 to 3 hours a day on self-care tasks that are all about me, and are like, wow, that's a lot. But at the same time, that makes it so that the other 10 to 12 hours or however long I'm awake each day, it makes me like a better, warmer, more authentic person, where I'm showing up with good intentions in everything that I do and feeling like I'm in a good mindset. And I let things slip off my back more than I normally would, as I've learned both in addiction as well as in recovery, that it's very easy for me to get into like a mindset, not only of rules of how things should and shouldn't be for myself, but also for other people. I can, in the past, get very judgy, and I've been judgy even in sobriety. And I only kind of thought of it last night as I was reflecting about how, in my experience, it's very much my like a relationship to trusting the process, or my higher power, or faith, or whatever you want to call it. Just me having the true understanding that everything's going to be okay. Like, as long as I'm doing my best every single day, which I'm doing genuinely, in the way that I show up for work, in the way that I show up for my sober fellows, in the way that I show up for my podcasting, in the way that I show up for my friends and my family. Like, I'm showing up for everyone 110% right now, because I'm spending so much time taking care of myself. And I think that I got to a point when I found this routine that made me feel really good and gave me this great grace. When things started to affect my ability of if I could continue it to the same level or the same certain extent, I almost got fearful that it would be taken away from me altogether. But I realized, kind of like what I realized with my fitness journey, is that life is going to happen. Trusting life on life's terms isn't only just a matter of just having the faith, but also understanding that things can change, and to be willing to go with the flow and to listen to those signs, or, listen to reason, or again, however you want to frame it. But knowing that when I might have certain plans or hopes for how my day is going to go, if a wrench gets thrown in the plans, know that that's okay, and that I'm okay. And that if, due to an important meeting or a doctor's appointment or X, Y, or Z reason, I might not be able to do my self-care full routine to its fullest extent one day a week, that doesn't mean that I'm losing anything. It means that I'm gaining an opportunity to do something else for a change, knowing that my self-care routine will be there for me the following day and that I can keep it going and that I'm not losing it or anything forever by trying new things. It's kind of like with meetings. I was so afraid of trying new meetings and risk that it would almost be replacing other meetings that I would go to or hanging out with new friends and afraid of what that might say about old friendships. And I realized that as long like as I'm putting in more of myself, that there's more of me then to give out to the others outside. And just that confidence, I think a lot of that not only comes from my connection with my higher power right now, but also the how connected I am to my other friends. My confidence is something that kind of comes with this, that people have been noticing how confident I'm feeling more often than not. Of course, that's a swinging pendulum that can change from time to time or day to day as the wind blows. But on the whole, I'm feeling much more confident about myself than I have in a while. And for the first time really in my life, I think I'm feeling it in the way that like we all should, which is like that I am amazing and special because we're all amazing and special. And it's not that I'm better than anyone else at anything else that I'm doing, but it's that if I'm able to be able to see how amazing and wonderful all these people in my life are, how my guests are amazing, how my listeners are the best, coolest listeners ever, when all of these things around me I'm able to notice as amazing, why can't I notice that in myself? And so I've been noticing it in myself more, not in a way where I'm comparing myself to others, but just in that I'm embracing who I am. And that also feels really good. And between that and my self-care routine, like I know that as much as it might be, there's a parts of me that are nervous about going next week to LA for the first time. I'm sure that as soon as I get back, I'll report back like how great and amazing it was, because I'm not listening to, like, I'm not preventing myself from new experiences because LA is a place I've never been before, or I've never been to the West Coast, or that I don't know anyone really out there. It's been exciting just going for it. And I still don't even know, other than the conference, exactly what's in store for me next week, other than that, and getting to meet Joey from Rainbow Hill in real life, which will also be exciting. And a gift of this podcast and my sobriety is being able to go out and experience that. And by the time that you're listening to this, I'll have had experienced it. And it's just so cool that that's again another gift of this podcast, is being able to go out to a new space and then realize that I did connect with someone who is out in that new space before, and they'll make it a little bit nicer of a transition for me to meet up with him on Monday when I land. So with that, I have rambled long enough because Brian has an amazing, wonderful share in store for you about what their experience was like getting sober and living life sober for quite some time, and embracing and unleashing their authentic self as a true sober hero. So I will pass it over to my interview with Brian now. Enjoy. Hello there, Super Sober Heroes. It's your host, Steve, here with Brian. Thanks for coming on, Brian.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Yes, and I had the pleasure of getting to meet you through the Here Queer Sober Facebook group. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and tell a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Happy to
So,
do service always.
yeah, so tell me a little bit about who you are and where you're at with your sobriety today.
Well, my name is Brian Belovitch. I am a person in recovery. My sober date is 11/8/86, and I have had the great privilege of being sober since 1986, 37 years last November. So, a
That is
little
quite
while.
that is quite the inspiration. I have about 2 months of living on this earth on your sobriety, or 3 or 4 months, but because we're in August of that year, so my sobriety or your sobriety and my life are about the same.
Oh, wow, that's
That's
interesting.
it's very cool when I can see that though, because it makes me inspired. Because I remember for a while there, I didn't think that I was gonna live past 30 or 40, and so the fact that I can now see people who, when they get sober and when they stay sober, that they can last that much longer, it's really inspiring. So I'm excited to get to know you better.
Thank you so much. 30 was really rough for me too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't think I was gonna make it either.
yeah. And what would you say is your favorite part of being a member of the queer community today?
Well, I love that I have so much experience and so much history, and I've lived through a lot of difficult things in sobriety and amazing things in sobriety. It's not all gloom and doom. I'm pretty much a happy, joyous, free kind of person. But I think the best thing about being an elder now in the queer community is that I do have some sort of responsibility to carry the message the way I received it back in the day. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, it is important and exciting. So why don't we jump right into it then? Because I understand, especially after seeing that you're an author who wrote a book about some of your experiences, that you've lived quite the interesting journey. Why don't we jump in and tell us what your path to sobriety was like in your life up to that point?
Yeah, sure. It's out the Cliff Notes version. I don't know if we have time for the whole grueling adventure of Brian Belovitch, but
Mhm.
the Cliff Notes version is that before I got sober, I was living as a transgender woman and for about almost 15 years in the 70s and 80s, at a time that was particularly challenging. It's always challenging for LGBTQ plus people, but at that time in history, there was very little known and there was very little resources and very little support and understanding about people of trans experience from within the gay community and from within the heterosexual community. There was a lot of things that people didn't really understand about what it was like to be living a life like that. So when I got sober at the age of 30 in 1986, I had pretty much done everything I possibly could as a good alcoholic addict can, because we're formidable when we focus on something that it is we want to try to do. And it led me to a really dark path in my life. I often say when I share it, general meetings, that it almost killed me, really. And I'm a low bottom, practically homeless, crack addict, alcoholic, heroin addict, pills, pot, tobacco, sex, money, all that good stuff. But, when I came into the program, I was living as a trans woman, and I had pretty much been successful in my transition. And 9 times out of 10 people didn't know that I was trans. I had passing privilege, is what the kids call it today. And I was married. I married a serviceman in the 80s and lived with him off a base in Germany. And, there have been whispers in the community that my story has been lifted by Hedwig and the Angry Inch, aspects of my story. I don't know if you're familiar with that play and that movie. But anyway, so I came into the program, and after I stayed sober for a year, they say no major changes in the first year, which is kind of a good suggestion. And I'm glad I took it because, I was coming in with the idea that, well, maybe if I had gender confirmation surgery, that would solve all my problems and I would find love in my life and I would be complete. And, as time went on and I went into therapy, I'm a huge advocate for outside help. And as I went into therapy and started to take a really deep dive into sort of the 4-step area of our program, which is, we do a fearless and moral inventory of ourselves. And I started to look at what was my part in this life that I had created for myself. And it was quite shocking, when you are that honest with yourself. And so what I came to believe was that I did a lot of the things in my transition for the wrong reason. I had zero self-esteem as a little kid. I grew up as a queer, misgendered, outlier, kid in this huge family of these macho brothers and working class, parents. And, my childhood was really traumatic from that standpoint. A lot of abuse, physical, sexual, mental, emotional abuse. not only from my family of origin, but from the world. And so there was never a safe place for me growing up. And so I retreated into this other, when I was old enough to act out on the messages that I was receiving as a little boy, I did. And so I started to lose Brian. Brian went away and was replaced by this beautiful creation. But I never made a sober decision in my life. Like everything was done under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So a lot of things went wrong because of that. And I started to say earlier, I had such low self-esteem and such a low opinion of myself that if you thought it was a good idea, Steve, to do whatever I did it because I was in such terror and fear of being abandoned by the few friends that I did have. And so I did a lot of things for the wrong reason. So that was what happened to me when I did my fourth step in my first year of sobriety.
Yeah.
So imagine my second year was all about restoring my body to sanity. I
Mhm.
had breast implants. I had been taking hormones for 15 years. I had a completely different name, completely different body identity. And, it was another coming out. It was a third coming out in sobriety as a gay man.
Mhm.
And I never wanted to be gay um, in the first place. So it was a big deal and a lot of recovering myself, reclaiming myself. And it's been quite a fascinating journey up until this point.
Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing all that. I can definitely, it is interesting. You're unique in that I've never heard anyone share the specifics of your journey, but I believe that, all of my listeners can understand what it felt like when we struggle with our self esteem and our self worth, being willing to grab onto what other people tell us we are and believe it is truth rather than looking within ourselves and asking ourselves, who am I? We give the power to tell us who we are and how damaging that can be for us. What was that experience like then after your second year of recovery, like going forward? How did the change kind of going back to embracing Brian again?
Well, I couldn't have done it without the sober community, number one, because a lot of my decisions earlier were done without any kind of like afterthought or any kind of like sober thinking, like think it through, one of our slogans, think,
Yeah.
follow it through to the end. That was never a way that I approached anything. So I couldn't have done it without the support of my sponsor, my sober community. And it was equally as difficult and challenging to reverse, a lot of the things that I did cosmetically. And, I did not have bottom surgery, which, thank God for that, because that would have been even more complicated than it was already complicated. But, not having, I had top surgery only. And so I always had a feeling that that was not a path that I could go down. And it was something that I was never really quite committed to that part of my earlier transition. But, finding, I had Medicaid, I was on public assistance, I was working part-time jobs, just getting newly sober. And it's amazing how, I've said in other interviews and in public speaking that one of the best things I ever learned about being sober was to learn how to ask for help.
Hmm.
And so I got so much help when I started to come to this decision to retransition back to my assigned gender at birth. And it costs a lot of money. It was very expensive. I didn't have a dime. And I was, like I said, I was on public assistance. And I went around to different doctors. And, I went through this ridiculous, like, panel of plastic surgeons that they were afraid to even do anything to me. They did not want to take out I had my implants removed, and then they did not want to do like the breast reduction. surgery. They were so afraid of getting sued. And also, it was at the height of the AIDS crisis. And I tested HIV positive. I'm also a long term survivor of HIV. And I tested HIV positive in my second year, in my first year. Yeah, my first year, 6 months. And so that was another barrier to have to deal with, to try to like, it was really difficult. It was really, really hard. And someone, was all set to co-sign a loan for me, and a good friend, a friend. And we went to the bank and we were signing the documents, and I was going to get my $5,000 that I needed to complete the operation. And talk about divine intervention, like a higher power moment. The bank administrator said, "Oh, can I see your license?" And she gave him her license, and she had a California license. And the bank clerk said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but we can't do the loan because you live out of town. You live out of state. We can only do a loan for someone that resides in New York State." So imagine my horror. I got to that point when I was like, okay, so this is going to work out. And the first thing I did was run to a meeting, and at the LGBT Community Center on 13th Street in Manhattan,
Yeah.
raise my hand. "Oh, boo hoo hoo, this happened. I can't believe it." I'm crying. I'm like sobbing hysterically. And right after the meeting, a sober friend came up to me and said, "Brian, don't worry. I'll co-sign the loan for you." And she co-signed the loan. I paid her back every penny of that $5,000. So, there's always a way. And, it's not always the way that I want it to be. But you said earlier, when we started talking about like how you just do this podcast and you let it go, and hopefully it'll all turn out the way that you want it to. And it has. And so that was difficult, the physical stuff, the mental stuff, running into people, even people I got sober with, like getting used to the idea of like not calling me by my other name, which I had for decades. It was hard for a lot of people as well. There was a lot of people confided in me that there was a loss that they were experiencing as well. And my own grief and my own experience of losing that somewhat dynamic personality that I had created. I was part of the New York nightclub scene, and big personality, really out there living the high life in the clubs. And so it was quite something to give over and to let go of, and not really know what, I had no idea what was going to replace it.
Yeah. And I mean, how powerful it is. I consider you a big sober hero because you were able to know though that that was the path that you were intended to go down, or trust the process. And what you said, it wasn't easy, but you did it anyway. And after putting that hard work in and putting, like you said, it was hard in so many ways. What was it like when you got through the other side of that? When did it start feeling lighter and you started feeling more like yourself?
Well, it didn't happen overnight. If anyone is new listening to this,
Mm-hmm.
you get what you put into your sobriety. And I was fortunate that I had good sponsors in the beginning. I did what they suggested. I paid a very high price for a very low life, and I did not want to repeat that mistake. And so I really hung on to my seat like it was the most expensive thing I ever sat in. And so I did, I was very willing. I was honest, I was open, and I was willing. And I did whatever people suggested. I didn't always agree with it, but I took suggestions, and I did the work, and I did the steps. I did my amends, I did my inventory. I made a list of persons that I'd harmed. I admit, when I still today have to do all of those things, because if I'm not doing those things today, I'm in jeopardy of going right back to where I was. I mean, all of those things that got me here still exist, you
Yeah,
know.
I mean, share more about that. What would you say are some things that helped you in your early sobriety that you still do today?
Well, I do a ton of I've never not had a service commitment. You know, I'm not addicted to service. Like, I don't feel like I have to have like 15 sponsees or, like run around to one meeting after another, but I've always had a service commitment. On the group level, I've had it on the service level in my earlier sobriety, but staying connected, always making myself visible. I don't sit in the back, I sit in the front. I meet people, I approach people. I don't sit back and wait for them to like come to me. Like, I don't, that's not going to get me very far. I mean, I see people that do that in meetings and I understand why they do it, because they're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They're fearful. They're fearful for many different reasons, rejection, whatever it is. But those are some key important things that have always been very helpful for me, is service, like sponsorship, chairing meetings, on Zoom. Even on Zoom, I do a service on Zoom. I have a service commitment on Sunday morning, my home group. So yeah, so service and staying visible and staying, you hear this in meetings sometimes about people talk about staying in the middle of the pack.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was a kid, I used to love those and wild. You're not old enough to remember this TV show, but there was a TV show called The Wild Kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
and it was all about these animals in Africa and all over the world. And they often showed like herds of like gazelles or like, deer or, different kinds of like animals. And they would show how like one of them would like drift off from the middle of the pack, and then they would get attacked by a lion or by wolves or coyotes or hyenas. And so, when they say in AA, stay in the middle of the pack, they're not kidding.
Yeah.
You know,
I, I might be too young to remember the show, but I've heard that analogy in the rooms
yeah,
before, and I
yeah,
always do enjoy that because I mean I have seen the Animal Planet stuff,
yeah,
and I know that it doesn't go well when you stray from the herd too far, both
yeah.
in
So,
animal life as well as in sobriety.
and there used to be a time where I thought like, oh, I don't want to go, I don't want to be here. But now I just want to be here. Like there'll come a time in your sobriety where you'll just really look forward to being at the meetings and being around your friends and meeting new people. And so I really want to be here in sobriety, in the middle of sobriety, even still today.
Yeah, and your sobriety is so inspiring. But I also want to bring it back because earlier we talked with your gender transitions, how the end result, though, is having to also kind of embrace yourself as a gay man. What has that experience been like in sobriety, and how have you learned to embrace your sexuality as well as your gender identity?
Well, I was always out somehow. Like even when I was a kid, I was not, I didn't have like, I don't know the best way to describe it. Like people knew that I was different. I
I
mean,
always say people were telling me I was gay before I knew what
yeah,
gay
they were
was.
telling me, they were calling me the names, sissy, fag, queer. And even my brothers used to like tease me, and so I always knew that, there was no hiding. Like I wasn't butch, like masculine, hyper masculine, like my brothers, or like some gay men are very masculine and presenting, and they don't have to, you don't even like look at them and think, oh, they must be gay. But I was just obviously gay from
Mhm.
the get-go.
Yeah.
So that was the thing, because I never wanted to be gay in the
Mhm.
first place. So coming out as gay in the middle of the fucking AIDS epidemic,
Yeah.
not the best time. And also, as a gay man who was somewhat feminine, I bought into the hyper masculinity idea. Like I had to go to the gym and I had to work out and I had to get a big chest and my features were always very soft. So, there wasn't anything much I could do about that. I mean, now I have a beard, but I don't like to shave in the winter. So, but and I'm very hairy. Like, I don't know. Once I stopped the hormones, it was like welcome to puberty. Like I got like really hairy and my legs got hair, so that wasn't so bad. But navigating the new world of the gay world was really a trip. I think I'm gonna write another book about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it being quite the trip, as you said. What kind of advice would you have for people who are in their sobriety trying to learn and embrace that? Because I know that oftentimes we struggle with embracing our sexuality.
Yeah, I mean, now it's like kind of cool to be a little non-binary and gender non-conforming and, queer or, fluid or, so now it's not such a big deal. But back then when I was, there was this sort of movement towards hyper masculinity based on the fear of people, who had AIDS and who didn't have AIDS, who was HIV positive, who was negative. So people built up their bodies and worked out and got really muscular. Not everybody, but for the, it was kind of a thing that was happening back then as sort of a signal that that you weren't sick. So that was a part of it that was really challenging. But today, I think we have a lot more acceptance, and certainly, if you're living your authentic life in sobriety, it's a lot easier to just accept the things you can't change, or change the things you can. It's a lot easier to just like say, this is me. And, some days I feel really masculine and some days I might feel more feminine, but I was able to like incorporate both aspects of my identity and take the best of them and work with them in ways that that I felt good about. Like I'm not ashamed of either part of myself today. And
Yeah.
that comes from, like I said earlier, doing the work and getting more comfortable, peeling that onion back, getting outside help is really crucial. I work today, I had a really low bottom. I don't think there's anything wrong with sex work. I did sex work to survive in the 70s and the 80s as a trans woman, as a boy. I turned tricks as a hustler, in my teens. And I did all of those things. I quit school because I was bullied in school and I never really got the education that I felt I deserved. And in sobriety, I've reclaimed all of that stuff. And I worked. I'm on my third career now. I have a I worked in the photography. I was a photo editor at People Magazine, a Fortune 500 company in sobriety. I worked there, and then I left that industry and I became a drug counselor and worked with other addicts and alcoholics for about 15 years. And more recently, I've graduated with my master's degree in mental health counseling, and I work with other people with mental health struggles with depression, anxiety, gender identity, sexuality, so it's been like a whole like 360 sort of movement for me. I went from like this like damaged, rejected, like, ostrafo- ostraf-
Ostracized?
ostracized, thank you. Not ostrich feather. Well, ostrich feathered too.
Ostrich feathers always look nice.
Ostrich feathered, gay. Look at me now, kids. I mean, I'm gonna be 68 next month in April, and I'm still living my life and working and helping other people and living the best that I can. And I recently found out I'm in a new film that came out. I also have a career as an actor and a singer, and a writer. I'm a published author. My book Transfigured. Here it is. I'll show you a cover.
Yeah,
My
I
book.
saw that in the Google searches, so I will
Yeah,
sure
my
to link
book
over to that in the show
Transfigured.
notes for everyone.
My journey from boy to girl to woman to man is out. It's all over the place. I'm going to write another book. And I recently found out I'm in a new movie that's coming out. I'm in this sort of like, I just got like a little message from a friend that saw it. And he's like, "You're in the movie." And like, so that's kind of fun.
Oh, exciting.
Lots of gifts, lots of
Lots
blessings.
of gifts of sobriety.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for coming on. I will link over to where people can find your book in the show notes. But if people wanted to connect with you, how would they? What's the best way for them to find you?
I'm on Facebook, Brian Neal. I use my middle name and my first name,
Okay.
Neil. And I'm on Threads as Transfigured Book, and also at Transfigured Book on Instagram. And then I have a mental health page which is called I'm Listening To
Okay.
on Instagram. So I'm easily found.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Brian. And yeah, when you have your next book, you'll have to come on and tell us all about that as well.
All right. Thank you for doing this, Steve. I really appreciate it. And you're doing great work, and all the best of luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank
All
you.
right. And future self, back to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Super Sober Heroes, for tuning in to another episode. I hope you enjoyed getting to hear from Brian. I definitely recommend you follow him or friend him, and he is a great guy that I'm sure you'll hear from again. And I would love to hear what you thought of the episode, as well as what other kind of content you'd like to see in future episodes. So you can always reach out to me at steve@sobersteve.com or on all the socials at Gay A Podcast. Make sure you're following us wherever you're listening right now so you can get these new episodes when they come out every single Thursday or Wednesday nights live, which I always forget to announce at the end of the episodes, but hopefully you're catching on that I also am on video now. And so you can watch or listen to me wherever you'd like. And until next time, stay sober, friends.